In 1962, a Soviet submarine sat deep beneath the Atlantic Ocean. Above it, American warships dropped practice depth charges. They weren't meant to destroy the submarine. They were meant to signal it to surface. The submarine crew didn't know that. They had lost contact with Moscow. They had been underwater for days. It was hot. Oxygen was low. The men were exhausted. And they believed war might have already begun. On board that submarine was a nuclear torpedo. One officer wanted to launch it. If he had, the United States would almost certainly have responded with nuclear weapons of its own. The world could have ended because of a misunderstanding in dark water. That moment did not happen at the beginning of the Cold War. It happened near its peak, because the Cold War was not a single crisis. It was decades of almost invasions, almost launches, almost irreversible mistakes. And the most unsettling part is this: many of those near disasters were accidents. The Cold War began not with a gunshot, but with suspicion. When World War II ended in 1945, two powers stood above the ruins of Europe: the United States and the Soviet Union. They had been allies against Nazi Germany. They did not trust each other. The United States emerged from the war economically strong and in possession of something no one else had: the atomic bomb. The Soviet Union emerged devastated but militarily powerful, occupying much of Eastern Europe. Each side believed it was acting defensively. Each side believed the other was expanding. The United States feared communist expansion across Europe and Asia. The Soviet Union feared capitalist encirclement and invasion. Both fears were grounded in history. The Soviet Union had been invaded twice in a generation, most catastrophically by Nazi Germany. Security meant buffer zones. The United States saw those buffer zones as a spread of authoritarian control. So Europe split. Western Europe aligned with Washington. Eastern Europe aligned with Moscow. An iron curtain, as Winston Churchill famously described it, descended across the continent. The Cold War was called cold because the two superpowers never fought each other directly, but they came dangerously close. The atomic bomb changed everything. In August 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The message to the world was clear: warfare had entered a new era. In 1949, the Soviet Union tested its own atomic bomb. The monopoly ended. Now there were two nations capable of destroying cities in seconds. The logic that followed was terrifyingly simple. If one side attacked, the other would retaliate. If both retaliated, both would be destroyed. This became known as mutually assured destruction. Peace in this strange new world was maintained by the promise of annihilation. Weapons multiplied. Hydrogen bombs were developed, thousands of times more powerful than the bombs used in Japan. Missiles replaced bombers. Submarines carried nuclear warheads silently across oceans. By the 1960s, both nations possessed enough nuclear weapons to destroy the planet many times over. And yet, neither side intended to start a nuclear war. That is what makes the Cold War so unnerving. It wasn't driven by leaders eager for apocalypse. It was driven by leaders who believed they were preventing it. Take the Berlin blockade of 1948. When the Western Allies introduced a new currency in West Germany, the Soviet Union blocked land access to West Berlin, hoping to force the West out of the city. The United States responded not with tanks, but with airplanes. For nearly a year, Western planes delivered food and supplies to West Berlin in one of the largest airlifts in history. If either side had fired a single shot, war could have followed. Instead, the blockade ended. The city remained divided. The world remained intact. Then came Korea. In 1950, North Korea, backed by the Soviet Union and later China, invaded South Korea. The United States intervened under a UN banner. American and Chinese forces fought directly. The war escalated rapidly. General Douglas MacArthur even suggested using nuclear weapons at China. The suggestion was rejected. The war ended in stalemate in 1953, but the possibility had been real. The Cold War wasn't just a standoff in Europe. It spread across the globe. In Cuba, it nearly ended everything. In 1959, Fidel Castro took power in Cuba. The island nation aligned with the Soviet Union, just 90 miles from Florida. The United States attempted to overthrow Castro in the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. The Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev saw an opportunity. In 1962, American spy planes discovered Soviet nuclear missiles being installed in Cuba. These missiles could strike much of the United States within minutes. President John F. Kennedy faced a choice: invade Cuba, bomb the missile sites, or blockade the island and demand removal. He chose a naval quarantine. For 13 days in October 1962, the world held its breath. American ships formed a ring around Cuba. Soviet ships approached. If either side miscalculated, nuclear war could begin. Behind closed doors, messages flew between Washington and Moscow. Publicly, both sides projected strength. Privately, both feared disaster. The crisis ended with a compromise. The Soviet Union removed its missiles from Cuba. The United States quietly agreed to remove its missiles from Turkey. War was avoided, but only barely. And it was not the only time catastrophe nearly occurred. In 1983, a Soviet early warning system detected what appeared to be incoming American missiles. The computer showed multiple launches. Protocol required reporting the attack immediately. A Soviet officer named Stanislav Petrov hesitated. He reasoned that if the United States were launching a first strike, it would likely send more than a handful of missiles. He judged the warning to be a malfunction. He was right. The alert was false. If he had followed procedure without question, retaliation might have begun. The world survived because one man doubted a machine. The Cold War was filled with such moments. In 1961, a U.S. bomber accidentally dropped a hydrogen bomb over North Carolina. It did not detonate. In 1979, a training tape simulating a Soviet attack was mistakenly loaded into a U.S. defense computer, briefly convincing officials that hundreds of missiles were incoming. Each time, the system corrected itself. Each time, humanity stepped back from the edge. But the constant threat reshaped life. Children practiced duck and cover drills in American schools. Families built fallout shelters. Governments constructed underground bunkers. In the Soviet Union, similar preparations unfolded. The fear was normalized. The Cold War was not just a military standoff. It was an arms race, a space race, an intelligence war. The United States and the Soviet Union competed to land on the moon. They spied on each other relentlessly. They supported opposing sides in conflicts from Vietnam to Afghanistan. In Vietnam, the United States fought to prevent communist expansion in Southeast Asia. The Soviet Union supported North Vietnam. The war lasted years, cost millions of lives, and deeply divided American society. In Afghanistan, the Soviet Union invaded in 1979, fearing instability near its borders. The United States funded and armed resistance fighters. That conflict drained Soviet resources and contributed to internal strain. For decades, the Cold War felt permanent. But systems under pressure eventually crack. By the 1980s, the Soviet economy was struggling. Maintaining military parity with the United States was enormously expensive. Internal dissatisfaction grew. When Mikhail Gorbachev came to power in 1985, he introduced reforms known as glasnost and perestroika, openness and restructuring. He sought to modernize the Soviet system. Instead, the reforms accelerated its unraveling. Meanwhile, U.S. President Ronald Reagan shifted from aggressive rhetoric to negotiation, meeting with Gorbachev multiple times to reduce nuclear arsenals. Treaties were signed, missiles were dismantled. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. Crowds crossed from east to west freely for decades for the first time. In 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved. The Cold War ended not with nuclear fire, but with political collapse. Looking back, it can feel inevitable, but it was not. The Cold War could have ended in 1962 in a nuclear exchange. It could have ended in 1983 with a false alarm. It could have ended in dozens of classified incidents we may never fully know. The world survived because nuclear weapons were not safe. It survived because individuals exercised restraint, because leaders chose compromise over pride, because systems failed, but not fatally. The Cold War teaches a paradox. Humanity developed the capacity to destroy itself completely, and then spent decades trying not to use it. It was a confrontation built on fear, on ideology, on genuine belief that the other system threatened freedom or survival. Americans believed they were defending democracy. Soviets believed they were defending socialism and security. Both believed they were preventing aggression. Neither intended to end the world. And yet, through accidents, miscommunication, and technical glitches, they came close. Closer than most people realized at the time. The Cold War wasn't just a single dramatic moment. It was a sustained test of judgment, a long stretch of history where one impulsive decision could have erased cities. It's easy to assume that because nuclear war did not happen, it was never likely. That assumption is comforting. It is also misleading. The record shows how fragile the balance truly was. The Cold War did not end because nuclear weapons stopped being dangerous. It ended because political conditions changed. The weapons remain. The lesson remains. Technology can outpace wisdom. Fear can escalate faster than facts. And sometimes survival depends on not grand strategy, but on a single person choosing not to press a button. The world almost ended by accident more than once. It did not because the system was flawless,